The scent of cinnamon and sugar drifted through the dusty streets of Quartz Hill, California on that sweltering afternoon in August 1883. And Ryland Anderson stopped his horse right in the middle of the thoroughfare to figure out where such an impossible aroma could be coming from in a town that had been dying for the past 2 years. He sat tall in his saddle, a lean man of 28 with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of weathered leather, squinting against the glare as he tried to locate the source. Quartz Hill had once been a thriving mining settlement, but when the silver veins ran dry and the railroad decided to bypass them for a town 15 miles south, people had scattered like tumbleweeds in a windstorm. The buildings that remained stood like hollow teeth in a skull, their paint peeling and windows dark. The general store operated only 3 days a week now. The church held services once a month when the circuit preacher bothered to make the trek. And the Lucky Dollar Saloon, which had once been the beating heart of this community, served maybe 5 customers on a good night. But that smell, that glorious, impossible smell of fresh baking made his mouth water and his chest ache with memories of his mother's kitchen back in Missouri, before the war had taken everything. Ryland urged his horse forward, following his nose like a hound on a trail. He passed the shuttered assay office, the empty lot where the hotel had burned down last winter, and the forlorn little schoolhouse that hadn't seen a student in 8 months. The scent grew stronger as he approached the Lucky Dollar, and he noticed something he had not seen in a very long time. People. Old Chester Mabry sat on the bench outside the saloon, his gnarled hands resting on his cane, a smile creasing his weathered face. The Hartley brothers, who ran cattle on the scrubland to the east, had tied their horses to the rail and were heading inside. Even Prudence Whitmore, the banker's widow who had not set foot in a saloon in her entire 63 years, was stepping through the swinging doors with her head held high and her handbag clutched tight. Ryland dismounted and tied his bay gelding next to the other horses. He had only returned to Quartz Hill 3 days ago after spending 2 years driving cattle up from Texas to Kansas, saving every penny he could. His father's ranch sat 5 miles outside town, and he had been shocked to see how much the place had deteriorated in his absence. But his father had written that things were hard all over, and Ryland had not realized just how hard until he rode into town and saw the ghost it had become. He pushed through the doors of the Lucky Dollar and stopped short. The interior, which he remembered as dim and dingy, with sawdust on the floor and the permanent smell of stale beer and tobacco, had been transformed. The windows had been cleaned until they sparkled, letting in streams of golden afternoon light. Fresh sawdust mixed with something that smelled like lavender covered the floorboards. The bar itself gleamed with fresh polish, and someone had hung cheerful yellow curtains behind it. But most shocking of all was the source of that heavenly aroma. A long table had been set up along one wall, covered with a white cloth, and on that cloth sat an array of baked goods that would have made a San Francisco hotel proud. Cinnamon rolls glistening with icing, apple tarts arranged in neat rows, golden brown dinner rolls, fruit-studded scones, and what looked like 3 different kinds of pie. And behind that table stood a woman unlike any Ryland had ever seen. She was perhaps 24 or 25, with a full, curved figure that her simple blue calico dress could not hide. Her arms were strong and flour-dusted. Her face was round and pretty with pink cheeks and a determined chin, and her hair was a rich chestnut brown, pinned up in a practical bun with little wisps escaping around her temples. But it was her eyes that caught him, bright green and fierce, filled with a defiant pride that dared anyone to comment on her size or her audacity in being here. She was serving Chester Mabry a cinnamon roll and saying something that made the old man laugh, actually laugh, something Ryland had not heard in years. The handful of other customers in the saloon, maybe a dozen people total, which was more than Ryland had seen gathered anywhere in town, except maybe Sunday services back when they were regular. All seemed entranced by both the food and the woman serving it. Jack Brennan, the owner of the Lucky Dollar, stood behind his bar looking simultaneously bewildered and hopeful, pouring beers and whiskey for customers who had actually shown up. Ryland approached the table slowly, feeling strangely nervous. Up close, the woman was even prettier, with a light dusting of freckles across her nose and the kind of lush, womanly figure his mother would have called healthy, and his trail-riding companions would have appreciated in far cruder terms. She looked up at him with those sharp green eyes, and he saw her posture stiffen slightly, as if preparing for mockery or judgment. "Welcome," she said, her voice melodious but cautious. "Would you like to try something? Everything is 5 cents except the pies, which are 10 cents for a slice." "I will take one of those cinnamon rolls," Ryland said, fishing in his pocket for coins. "And whatever gave you the idea to do this, because it might be the best thing to happen to this town in 2 years." A smile broke across her face, transforming her from pretty to genuinely beautiful, and she ducked her head as if unaccustomed to sincere compliments. "I arrived on the stage 2 weeks ago," she said, using a clean cloth to pick up one of the largest cinnamon rolls and set it on a small plate. "I came here to marry Samuel Garrett. We had been corresponding for 6 months. Ryland knew Samuel Garrett, a miner who had stayed on even after the silver dried up, convinced he would strike it rich if he just kept digging. I have not seen Samuel in town recently." Her expression tightened, pain flashing through her eyes before she mastered it. "When I arrived, I discovered that Samuel had departed 3 days prior. He left a note with Jack Brennan, saying he had gone to try his luck in the Yukon gold fields and did not think it appropriate to bring a wife into such uncertain circumstances." "That is a coward's way out," Ryland said bluntly, anger rising in his chest on behalf of this woman he did not even know. "To invite you all this way and then abandon you." "Yes," she said simply, handing him the plate. "But I find that rage, while satisfying, does not actually solve problems. I had spent nearly all my money on the journey here. I had sold everything I owned back in Ohio and burned all my bridges. I had nowhere to go and no means to get there." "So you started baking," Ryland said. "So I started baking," she confirmed. "It is the one thing I have always been truly good at. My grandmother taught me, and I spent 3 years working in a bakery in Cleveland before the owner's daughter decided she wanted my position, and I was let go. That was when I answered Samuel's advertisement." She gestured around the saloon. "Jack Brennan was kind enough to let me rent the room upstairs for a week in exchange for cleaning this place. When he saw what I could do, he offered me a partnership of sorts. I bake, and he provides the space and handles the drinks. We split the profits." "What is your name?" Ryland asked, realizing he had been too captivated by her story to ask the most basic question. "Kathleen Cooper," she said, and held out her hand like a man would, for a firm shake rather than a delicate touch. He took it, feeling the strength in her flour-dusted fingers and the calluses that spoke of hard work. "Ryland Anderson. My father has a ranch east of town." "The Anderson place," she said, recognition lighting her eyes. "Jack mentioned it. He said your father is a good man, one of the few who still believes this town has a future." "My father is an optimist," Ryland said, taking a bite of the cinnamon roll and nearly groaning aloud at the taste. It was perfect, sweet but not too sweet, the pastry flaky and rich, the cinnamon warm and fragrant. "This is incredible." Kathleen's cheeks flushed with pleasure, and he realized she was not someone accustomed to praise, which seemed criminal given her obvious talent. "Thank you. I have been experimenting with the amounts of spice. The climate here is so different from Ohio, and I find that things bake differently in the dry heat." Over the next hour, Ryland sat at a corner table and watched as more people trickled into the Lucky Dollar. Some he recognized, like Pete Haverson, who ran the livery, and Maria Santos, who did washing and mending for those who could afford it. Others were strangers who must have come in from the outlying ranches and homesteads, drawn by word of mouth that something remarkable was happening in town. Kathleen moved behind her table with efficient grace, serving pastries and making conversation with each customer. She remembered names after hearing them once and asked thoughtful questions about people's families and work. She teased old Chester about his sweet tooth and complimented Maria on her new bonnet. She was warm without being flirtatious, friendly without being overfamiliar, and Ryland could see that people responded to her genuine interest and her refusal to be anything other than herself. Jack Brennan, for his part, looked like a man who had been granted a reprieve from execution. He was actually having to move quickly behind the bar to keep up with orders, and Ryland heard him talking to Pete Haverson about maybe bringing in some music next week, maybe seeing if young Tommy Chen could bring his fiddle. When the crowd thinned a bit, Ryland approached the table again. Kathleen was carefully covering the remaining pastries with clean cloths, and he noticed that she had sold more than half of what she had started with. "Will you walk with me?" he asked impulsively. "I would like to show you something." Wariness crept into her expression. "I do not know you, Mr. Anderson." "That is fair," he said. "But it is broad daylight, and I am asking you to walk down the main street with me, where anyone can see. I only want to show you what this town used to look like before it started dying. I think you might appreciate it." She studied him for a long moment, and he had the sense that she was looking past his weathered exterior to measure his character. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she nodded. "Very well. Let me tell Jack I am stepping out for a few minutes." They walked out into the late afternoon sun, and Ryland noticed several people glancing their way. He knew what they saw: a lean, trail-worn cowboy and a plus-size woman who did not fit the delicate, corseted ideal that fashion magazines promoted. He did not care. He found her beautiful, but more than that, he found her interesting, and that was a rarer quality. "When I was a boy," he said as they walked past the empty general store, "this street was so crowded on Saturday nights that you could barely move. There were 3 saloons then, 2 hotels, a theater company that came through twice a year, and a restaurant that served steaks so thick you could barely finish one. The mining company had an office right there." He pointed to a building that now housed only dust and spiders, and they employed 300 men at the peak. "What happened?" Kathleen asked, shading her eyes to look at the building. "The easy silver ran out," Ryland said. "Oh, there is probably still plenty in the ground, but you would need expensive equipment and a lot of capital to get it out. The mining company decided it was not worth the investment and pulled out. Then the railroad chose a route that bypassed us. People started leaving. First a trickle, then a flood. Within a year, we lost 2/3 of our population. They had reached the end of the main street, where a small rise gave a view of the valley beyond. The land stretched out in shades of gold and brown, punctuated by the dark green of scattered Joshua trees and the silvery purple of distant mountains. "It is beautiful," Kathleen said softly. "Harsh, but beautiful." "It is," Ryland agreed. "And that is what my father understands, what a few others understand. This land has value beyond silver. There is water if you know where to find it. The grazing is decent if you manage it right. And there is space, freedom, possibility. But you cannot build those things alone. You need community. You need people who will invest in each other and in the future. Kathleen turned to look back at the town, her expression thoughtful. Is that what you think I am doing with my baking? I think you are giving people a reason to come together, Ryland said. I think you are reminding them that Quartz Hill is still worth gathering in. That might seem small, but it is not. Community starts with people showing up. She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. I did not come here intending to save a town, Mr. Anderson. I came here because I was alone and lonely, and I thought I could build a life with a man I had never met. That was foolish. That was hopeful, Ryland corrected gently. And hope is not foolish, even when it is disappointed. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw the vulnerability beneath her fierce pride. Why are you being kind to me? Because you deserve kindness, he said simply. And because I think what you are doing is remarkable, even if you do not see it that way yet. They walked back to the saloon in companionable silence. And when they arrived, Kathleen went back to her table and Ryland went back to his corner, but something had shifted between them. He found himself reluctant to leave, and he nursed a single beer for another hour, just watching her work and thinking thoughts he had not allowed himself in a long time. When she finally packed up the remaining pastries and said good night to Jack, Ryland stood as well. May I walk you home? He asked. I live upstairs, she said, gesturing to the staircase at the back of the saloon. Then may I walk you to the stairs? He asked with a slight smile. She laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that made his chest feel warm. I suppose that would be acceptable. At the base of the stairs, she turned to him. Thank you, Mr. Anderson, for the conversation and the kindness. Ryland, he said. Please call me Ryland, and I should thank you. That cinnamon roll was the best thing I have tasted in 2 years. Then you should come back tomorrow, she said. I am planning to make apple fritters. I will be here, he promised. He kept that promise. The next day he rode into town in the early afternoon and found the Lucky Dollar already bustling with more people than the day before. Kathleen was behind her table, which was laden with apple fritters, sugar cookies, and loaves of fresh bread that people were buying whole. She looked up when he entered, and her face lit up with a smile that made him feel like he had just won something valuable. He bought 2 fritters and a loaf of bread to take home to his father, and when the crowd thinned, he helped her carry water from the pump behind the saloon so she could wash her baking pans. It was domestic and ordinary, and yet it felt significant in a way he could not quite name. Tell me about your ranch, she said as they worked. What is it like? Struggling, he admitted. My father has 100 head of cattle, but he needs twice that to make it truly profitable. The ranch is just him now, and he is 63. He tries, but there is only so much one man can do. I have been away for 2 years, working cattle drives to save money, sending what I could home, but it is not enough. Is that why you came back? She asked. To help him, partly, Ryland said, and partly because I was tired of wandering. I want to build something permanent, something that will last. But I will admit, when I rode into Quartz Hill 3 days ago and saw how much it had diminished, I wondered if I had made a mistake coming back. And now, she asked softly. Now I think maybe there is something worth building here after all, he said, looking directly at her. She flushed and looked away, but he saw the pleasure in her expression. You do not know me, Ryland. You do not know anything about me. Then tell me, he said. I want to know. So she did. Over the next few days, as he continued to come to town each afternoon, she told him her story in pieces. She had grown up in Ohio, the youngest of 6 children. Her father had been a clerk, her mother a seamstress. She had always been larger than other girls, and she had endured teasing and exclusion because of it. But her grandmother had loved her fiercely and taught her to bake, and in the kitchen, Kathleen had found both competence and peace. When her grandmother died, Kathleen had taken a job in a bakery, happy to have found a place where her skill mattered more than her size. But the owner's daughter had been cruel, mocking Kathleen's appearance and eventually convincing her father to dismiss Kathleen on a trumped-up charge of theft. Kathleen had been devastated, not just by the loss of her job, but by the injustice of it. "I had never stolen anything in my life," she told Ryland, her voice shaking with remembered fury. "But no one believed me. My word meant nothing against the owner's daughter. I realized then that I needed to go somewhere new, somewhere I could start fresh. So I answered Samuel's advertisement." "I am sorry he betrayed your trust," Ryland said, "but I cannot be entirely sorry he left, because otherwise I would not have met you." She looked at him with those bright green eyes, and he saw hope and fear warring in her expression. "You should not say such things." "Why not if they are true?" "Because I have learned that, when something seems too good to be true, it usually is," she said quietly. "You are kind and handsome, and you treat me like I matter, but I do not understand why." Ryland set down the crate he had been carrying and turned to face her fully. "Kathleen, I am going to be very plain with you because I think you deserve honesty. I find you beautiful. I find you talented and brave and interesting. I think what you are doing here is extraordinary, and I want to spend every moment I can in your presence. If that is too forward, I apologize, but I have spent 2 years on the trail learning that life is short and opportunities are fleeting. I do not want to miss this one by being cautious." Tears glistened in her eyes, and for a moment he thought he had overstepped, but then she smiled, tremulous but real. "I find you extraordinary too," she whispered, "but I am afraid." "So am I," he admitted. "But I think the best things in life require courage." After that, things changed, not dramatically but in small, significant ways. Ryland made a point of coming to town every day, helping Kathleen with whatever she needed. He hauled supplies from the general store, chopped wood for the saloon stove, and repaired a shelf that had collapsed under the weight of her baking supplies. In return, she fed him the best meals he had ever tasted and talked with him about everything from politics to poetry to the best way to break a stubborn horse. He learned that she was clever and well-read, that she had a sharp sense of humor and a fierce loyalty to those she cared about. He learned that she sang quietly to herself while she baked, and that she had a habit of chewing her lower lip when she was concentrating. He learned that she had a deep well of sadness in her about being rejected and judged for her size, but also a determination not to let that sadness define her. And she learned about him. He told her about his mother, who had died of fever when he was 12. He told her about the war, which his father had fought in and which had left scars both visible and invisible. He told her about the years of struggle, of watching the ranch nearly fail, of leaving to make money and hating every moment away. He told her about his dreams of building something lasting, of having a family, of being part of a community that thrived rather than merely survived. "I used to think I wanted to go somewhere big and exciting," he said one evening as they sat on the bench outside the saloon, watching the sun set over the valley. "San Francisco or Denver, places with opportunities. But I realize now that I want to be somewhere I can make a difference. Somewhere that needs what I have to offer." "And you think Quartz Hill is that place?" Kathleen asked. "I think it could be," he said. "Especially now." She knew he meant her, and she reached over to take his hand. It was the first time they had touched beyond accidental brushes, and the warmth of her palm against his sent a thrill through him. They sat like that as the sky turned gold and crimson, their fingers intertwined, and Ryland felt a certainty settle into his bones. This woman was meant to be his. He did not know how he knew it, but he did. The lucky dollar continued to thrive. Word spread throughout the county about Kathleen's baking, and people began making the trip to Quartz Hill specifically to visit the saloon. Jack Brennan was so busy that he hired Maria Santos's teenage son, Diego, to help serve drinks. Kathleen's profits allowed her to buy better supplies and experiment with new recipes. She added roast beef sandwiches and vegetable pot pies to her offerings, and those sold out as quickly as the sweets. But more importantly, the town was waking up. The general store extended its hours. Old Chester Mabry started a checkers tournament that met at the saloon every Wednesday. Prudence Whitmore organized a ladies' auxiliary to discuss town improvements. People who had been isolated on their ranches and homesteads started coming in regularly, renewing friendships and making new ones. Ryland's father, Thomas Anderson, came to town for the first time in months and met Kathleen. Ryland had been nervous about the introduction, knowing his father could be gruff and suspicious of newcomers. But Thomas had taken one look at Kathleen's table of baked goods, tasted a slice of her apple pie, and declared her a miracle worker. "Son," Thomas said later, pulling Ryland aside, "if you do not marry that woman, you are a fool." Ryland had laughed, but his father's words echoed his own thoughts. He was falling in love with Kathleen, deeply and irrevocably, and he was fairly certain she felt the same way. But they had known each other less than 3 weeks, and he did not want to rush her or make her feel pressured. Then everything changed on a Tuesday in early September. Ryland rode into town that morning and immediately sensed something was wrong. The Lucky Dollar was closed, unusual for this time of day when Kathleen was normally already baking. He tied his horse and knocked on the door. Jack Brennan answered, his expression grim. "She is upstairs," Jack said. "There was a man here this morning, said he was Samuel Garrett. He wants to talk to her." Rage, hot and fierce, flooded through Ryland. He came back. "Apparently the Yukon was not as promising as he hoped," Jack said with disgust. "He heard about what Kathleen has been doing here, and he thinks he can just waltz back in and claim her." "Like hell," Ryland growled, starting for the stairs. Jack caught his arm. "She wanted to see him alone, said she needed to face him on her own terms, but I do not like it and I am not letting him take her anywhere." Ryland forced himself to breathe, to think rationally despite the fury pounding through his veins. Kathleen was strong and smart. She could handle this. But that did not mean he had to like it. He paced the saloon for 20 minutes before the stairs creaked and Kathleen appeared. Her face was pale but composed, and Samuel Garrett followed her down. Garrett was a stocky man in his late 30s with thinning hair and a weak chin, and Ryland hated him on sight. "Kathleen," Garrett was saying, "you must be reasonable. We had an understanding." "I had every intention of sending for you once I was established." "You abandoned me," Kathleen said, her voice cold and steady. "You left a note and disappeared. For 6 weeks, I have heard nothing from you. In that time, I have built a life here, a good life, and I have no intention of giving it up to follow you to some frozen wasteland on the vague promise that you might be successful someday." "You came here to marry me," Garrett insisted. "You sold everything to be my wife." "I came here to marry a man who wanted me," Kathleen corrected. "You made it very clear that you did not. Consider our agreement terminated." Garrett's expression turned ugly. "You have been living in a saloon, working like a common server. You have probably been making yourself available to every cowboy who walks through that door. I am offering you respectability, and you would be wise to take it." Ryland moved before he could think, putting himself between Garrett and Kathleen. "You need to leave," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Right now." Garrett looked him up and down. "And who are you?" "Someone who will throw you through that door if you do not walk out of it on your own," Ryland said. Jack Brennan stepped up beside him, and Diego appeared from the back room with a stout wooden club. The message was clear, and Garrett was not stupid enough to ignore it. He backed toward the door, pointing at Kathleen. "You are making a mistake," he said. "You will regret this." "The only thing I regret is answering your advertisement in the first place," Kathleen said. "Goodbye, Samuel." Garrett left, slamming the door behind him, and Kathleen sagged against the bar. Ryland was at her side in an instant, his hands on her shoulders. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," she said, but her voice shook. "I am just so angry. He actually thought I would be grateful. He thought I would drop everything and follow him like some obedient dog." "You handled it perfectly," Ryland said. "You were strong and clear, and he has no claim on you." "I know," she said, "but I keep thinking, what if I had not found my baking successful here? What if I had been desperate and alone when he came back? Would I have gone with him just because I had no other options? That terrifies me." Ryland cupped her face in his hands, making her look at him. "But you did find success. You did create options for yourself. You are not desperate or alone, Kathleen. You are surrounded by people who value you and care about you." "Including you?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "Especially me," he said. "I love you, Kathleen Cooper. I know it has only been a few weeks, but I am certain of it. I love your strength and your kindness and your courage. I love how you sing while you bake, and how you remember everyone's name, and how you look at this dying town and see possibility. I love you, and I want to build a life with you if you will have me." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been trying not to because I was afraid of being hurt again, but I do. I love you so much it scares me." He kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that quickly deepened into something more passionate. She tasted like cinnamon and hope, and when they finally broke apart, Jack Brennan was grinning and Diego was whooping with delight. "About damn time," Jack said. "I have been watching you two dance around each other for weeks." Kathleen laughed, wiping her eyes. "We have an audience." "I do not care," Ryland said. "Let the whole town know. I love you and I want to marry you. Will you marry me, Kathleen?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." The next few weeks passed in a blur of joy and activity. Ryland and Kathleen were married in the small church in Quartz Hill, with Thomas Anderson giving the bride away and half the town in attendance. Kathleen wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she had sewn herself, and Ryland wore his best suit and polished boots. When the circuit preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held at the Lucky Dollar, naturally, and Kathleen had spent days preparing a feast. There were pies and cakes and pastries, but also roasted chicken and beef, fresh vegetables from the few gardens people managed to coax from the unforgiving soil, and a wedding cake that was 3 tiers of buttery perfection. People danced to Tommy Chen's fiddle and laughed and celebrated, and Ryland thought he had never seen Kathleen look more beautiful or more happy. As the evening wore on and people began to drift home, Thomas pulled Ryland aside. "I am giving you the East Pasture," he said without preamble. 20 acres, good water access. You can build a house there, start your own herd. It is time for you to have your own place. Ryland was speechless. The East Pasture was some of the best land on the Anderson property. "Father, I cannot take that." "You can and you will," Thomas said firmly. "You came back to help me, and you have. But more than that, you have helped this whole town come back to life. That woman you married is a force of nature, and she needs a partner who can match her. You are that partner, so take the land, build your house, and raise your family. That is what I want." Ryland embraced his father, overcome with emotion. "Thank you." Thomas clapped him on the back. "Just make sure she keeps baking those cinnamon rolls. I have gotten used to having them every Sunday." Kathleen continued to bake for the lucky dollar, but she cut back her hours as she and Ryland focused on building their life together. With help from neighbors and friends in town, they constructed a small but sturdy house on the east pasture. It had a large kitchen, which was Kathleen's priority, and a wide porch that looked out over the valley. Ryland bought 10 head of cattle with the money he had saved from his trail driving days, and he began building his herd. It was hard work, harder than he had anticipated, but he found joy in it because he was working toward something permanent, something meaningful. And every evening, no matter how exhausted he would come home to Kathleen and the smell of fresh bread and the sound of her laughter, and he knew he had made the right choice. Kathleen, for her part, thrived. She continued to bake for the saloon 3 days a week, which was enough to keep her income steady without overwhelming her. She also began teaching baking classes to some of the women in town, sharing her skills and building friendships. She started a small garden near the house and discovered she had a knack for growing herbs and vegetables. She wrote letters to her family in Ohio, mending fences that had been strained when she left, and she slowly built a network of relationships in Quartz Hill that made her feel truly at home. The town continued its slow but steady revival. The general store expanded its inventory. A new schoolteacher arrived, a young woman named Alina Pritchard, who boarded with Prudence Whitmore and started classes for the handful of children in the area. A traveling doctor began stopping in Quartz Hill once a month to see patients. It was not the boom times of the mining era, but it was sustainable, a community built on relationships and mutual support rather than fleeting mineral wealth. One evening in late October, as Ryland and Kathleen sat on their porch watching the sun set, she took his hand and placed it on her belly. "I am with child," she said softly. "I am fairly certain. I think I am about 2 months along." Joy, pure and overwhelming, flooded through him. "Truly." "Truly," she said, her eyes shining. "We are going to have a baby." He pulled her close, kissing her temple and breathing in the scent of her hair. "I love you so much," he said. "You have given me everything I ever wanted but never thought I could have." "You have done the same for me," she said. "When I arrived in Quartz Hill, I was broken and lost. I thought I had reached the end of my options. But instead, I found the beginning of everything. I found purpose and community and love. I found you." They sat together as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, talking about names for the baby and what kind of cradle Ryland should build, and how they would manage the ranch, and the baking and parenthood all at once. It was overwhelming and exciting and perfect. The winter of 1883 was mild by California standards, with only a few brief cold snaps and enough rain to green up the valley. Kathleen's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though she suffered from terrible morning sickness in the early months that left her pale and exhausted. Ryland hovered anxiously, trying to help, until she finally snapped at him that she was pregnant, not dying, and he needed to let her breathe. After that, he found a balance between concern and respect for her independence, and they navigated the challenges together. In February, Jack Brennan approached them with a proposal. "I want to expand the food offerings at the Lucky Dollar," he said. "I want to turn the back room into a proper kitchen and serve full meals, not just snacks. But I cannot do it without Kathleen's expertise, and I know she will have her hands full with the baby soon. What if we brought in someone else to help? Someone Kathleen could train who could do the daily cooking while Kathleen focuses on the baking and the special occasions." It was a good idea, and after some discussion, they agreed. They put out word that they were looking for someone with cooking experience, and a week later, a young Chinese woman named Lin Y appeared at the Lucky Dollar. She had worked in a restaurant in San Francisco but had left after the owner tried to cheat her out of wages. She was skilled, hardworking, and eager for a fresh start, and Kathleen liked her immediately. With Lin Y handling the daily cooking and Kathleen providing recipes and guidance, the Lucky Dollar became known not just for its baked goods, but for its meals. People began coming from even farther away, and Jack Brennan found himself running a thriving business for the first time in years. He was generous with his success, raising wages and investing in improvements to the building. Kathleen gave birth to their first child, a daughter, in May of 1884. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Ryland feared he might lose her. But Kathleen was strong, stronger than he had ever imagined, and when he finally held their daughter in his arms, red-faced and squalling, he wept with relief and joy. They named her Rose after Ryland's mother, and she was the light of their lives. Kathleen proved to be a devoted mother, balancing her baking work with caring for the baby with the same efficiency she brought to everything. Ryland was besotted with his daughter, and he could often be found rocking her to sleep while singing old trail songs in a rumbling bass voice. Thomas Anderson adored his granddaughter and visited nearly every day, usually bearing some small gift or toy he had carved. Ryland watched his father, who had been so worn down by years of struggle, bloom with new energy and purpose. The ranch was doing better. Ryland's herd was growing, and there was hope in the air. When Rose was 6 months old, Kathleen returned to baking part-time at the Lucky Dollar. She brought the baby with her, and Rose became a fixture in the saloon, sleeping in a cradle behind the baking table while her mother worked. The customers loved it, and old Chester Mabry appointed himself Rose's unofficial guardian, watching over her with fierce devotion. Life settled into a rhythm that was both ordinary and extraordinary. Ryland worked the ranch, building his herd and reputation as a skilled cattleman. Kathleen baked and taught and nurtured both her family and her community. They hosted dinners at their house, attended church on Sundays, and participated in the various committees and projects that were slowly rebuilding Quartz Hill. The town continued to grow, slowly but steadily. A new family moved into the old hotel building and renovated it into a boarding house. A printer arrived and started a weekly newspaper. The railroad, seeing that Quartz Hill had not collapsed as expected, began discussing the possibility of adding a spur line, though that was still years in the future. Through it all, Ryland and Kathleen's love deepened and matured. They had their challenges, of course. There were arguments about money and time management and the best way to discipline a toddler who inherited both her mother's stubbornness and her father's determination. There were moments of doubt and frustration and exhaustion. But there was also laughter and passion and partnership, a sense that they were building something together that was bigger than either of them alone. When Rose was 2, Kathleen became pregnant again, and this time she carried twins, 2 boys who arrived healthy and loud in the spring of 1886. They named them Robert and Raymond, after no one in particular, but because Kathleen liked the way the names sounded together, and Ryland was too exhausted from the birth to argue. The house, which had seemed spacious when they built it, suddenly felt cramped, and Ryland began planning an addition. With help from friends and neighbors, they added 2 bedrooms and expanded the kitchen, which Kathleen desperately needed as she tried to balance 3 small children with her baking commitments. It was chaotic and overwhelming and perfect. Ryland would come in from a long day of ranch work to find Kathleen covered in flour, a baby on each hip, while Rose helped by making a mess with the mixing bowls. He would take the twins and play with Rose while Kathleen finished her baking, and then they would all sit down to a simple supper, and he would think that this ordinary domestic chaos, was everything he had ever wanted. Thomas Anderson, now in his late 60s, finally agreed to slow down and let Ryland take over more of the ranch work. He spent his time carving toys for his grandchildren and sitting on his son's porch, smoking his pipe and offering unsolicited advice that was actually quite helpful. Kathleen's relationship with the women of Quartz Hill deepened. She was no longer the newcomer or the abandoned bride, but rather a pillar of the community. She helped organize a harvest festival, started a lending library in the back corner of the Lucky Dollar, and mentored several younger women who wanted to start their own businesses. She had proven that a woman could be successful on her own terms, and she took that responsibility seriously. By the summer of 1887, 4 years after Kathleen had first arrived in Quartz Hill, the transformation was complete. The town that had been dying had been reborn into something different but vibrant. It was not the wild boom town of the mining era, but rather a true community, built on agriculture and ranching and mutual support. The Lucky Dollar was now the social center of Quartz Hill, hosting not just meals and drinks but also dances, meetings, and celebrations. Jack Brennan had paid off his debts and was actually making a profit. Lynn Y. had married Diego Santos, and they were talking about opening their own restaurant in a few years. Old Chester Mabry, now well into his 80s, still held court at his favorite table, playing checkers and telling stories to anyone who would listen. Ryland's ranch was thriving. He had built his herd to over 50 head of cattle, and he had a reputation throughout the county for quality stock. He had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men looking for opportunities, and he treated them fairly and taught them well. He was becoming the kind of man his father was, a leader in his community, someone people turned to for advice and help. One evening in September, Ryland and Kathleen celebrated their 4th wedding anniversary by leaving the children with Thomas and spending the night at their house alone for the first time in months. They cooked a simple meal together, drank wine on the porch, and made love with the unhurried passion of people who knew each other's bodies well and loved what they found there. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in their bed, Kathleen said, "Do you remember the day we met? When you walked into the Lucky Dollar, and I served you a cinnamon roll. I remember thinking you were the most interesting woman I had ever seen," Ryland said, running his fingers through her hair. "I remember the smell of that baking and the way the light hit your face and thinking that maybe coming home had not been a mistake after all." "I was so scared," Kathleen admitted. "I had been in Quartz Hill less than 2 weeks, and I felt like I was barely holding myself together. I was putting on a brave face, but inside I was terrified that I would fail, that I would end up with nothing and nowhere to go. And then you walked in and you were kind to me, genuinely kind, and I did not know how to handle that." "You handled it beautifully," Ryland said. "You have handled everything beautifully." "We handled it together," she corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. You supported me and challenged me and loved me, and you gave me the courage to become the person I wanted to be." "You did that yourself," Ryland said. "I just had the privilege of watching." She rolled over to face him, her eyes serious. "Do you ever regret it? Tying yourself to me instead of finding someone more conventional, someone who would have been easier?" "Easier," Ryland laughed. "Kathleen, you are many things, but easy has never been one of them. But do I regret it? Not for one single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You are the best thing that ever happened to this whole town. You took a place that was dying and brought it back to life with nothing but flour and sugar and determination. And love," she said softly. "I brought love too. "And love," he agreed, kissing her forehead. "So much love." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together. The years that followed were full and rich. Kathleen had 2 more children, another daughter and son, and the house expanded again to accommodate the growing family. Ryland's ranch continued to prosper, and he eventually bought adjacent property, expanding his holdings significantly. Thomas Anderson passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 71, surrounded by his family, and while his death was a sorrow, it was softened by the knowledge that he had lived to see his son settled and happy and his grandchildren thriving. Kathleen eventually stepped back from daily baking at the Lucky Dollar, handing that responsibility fully over to Lynn Y. and focusing on special occasions and teaching. She wrote a cookbook that was published by a printer in Sacramento and sold throughout California, and she became something of a local celebrity. But she never forgot her roots or the town that had given her a second chance, and she remained deeply involved in Quartz Hill's community life. The railroad did eventually build that spur line in 1892, and Quartz Hill experienced a modest boom as it became a shipping point for cattle and agricultural products from the surrounding region. New businesses opened, and the population swelled to nearly double what it had been at its lowest point. But the character of the town, the sense of community that Kathleen's baking had sparked and that so many people had nurtured, remained strong. Rose Anderson grew into a confident, intelligent young woman who inherited her mother's talent for baking and her father's skill with horses. The twins, Robert and Raymond, were inseparable and wild, always finding new ways to get into trouble but fundamentally good-hearted. The younger children, Clara and Daniel, were calmer and more studious, and the house was always full of noise and laughter and the occasional tears. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1903, Ryland and Kathleen hosted a massive celebration at their ranch. It seemed like the entire county turned out, and the party lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and enough food to feed an army, most of it prepared by Kathleen and her now-grown daughters. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Ryland and Kathleen walked through their land, past the expanded house and the barns and corrals, out to the edge of the property where they could see the lights of Quartz Hill twinkling in the distance. "Do you remember standing on that rise?" Ryland said. "That first week we met, when I showed you the view and told you about the town's past." "I remember," Kathleen said, leaning against him. "You said that community starts with people showing up." "And you showed up," Ryland said. "You showed up when you could have given up and left. You showed up every day with your baking and your kindness and your refusal to be anything less than yourself. And because you showed up, the rest of us did too. We built something here, Kathleen, something that will last." She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I came to Quartz Hill thinking I was looking for a husband, for someone to complete me, but what I found was so much more than that. I found purpose in community and love, not just romantic love, but the love of friendship and belonging and mattering. I found myself, and I found you, my partner in all things, the love of my life. I am the luckiest man alive," Ryland said, pulling her close. "To have spent these 20 years with you, to have built this life with you, to watch our children grow and our community thrive. It is more than I ever dreamed possible." They stood there as the stars wheeled overhead, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something extraordinary together. Behind them, their house glowed with warm light, and the sounds of their children's laughter drifted on the evening breeze. Before them, the town of Quartz Hill spread across the valley, alive and thriving, a testament to the power of community and determination, and one woman's extraordinary baking. In the years that followed, as they grew older and their children had children of their own, Ryland and Kathleen would often return to that spot. They would stand together, hands clasped, remembering the day a plus-size woman arrived in a dying town with nothing but her skill and her courage, and how she had baked her way into the heart of a community, and one cowboy in particular. They would remember how love, both romantic and communal, could transform not just individuals but entire towns, turning despair into hope and strangers into family. And always, always, the Lucky Dollar Saloon smelled of cinnamon and fresh bread, and people gathered there to share meals and stories and laughter, continuing the tradition that Kathleen had started all those years ago. It became a legacy that would endure for generations, a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary transformations begin with the simplest acts of courage and kindness, with showing up and refusing to give up, with baking for a failing saloon and watching as, one by one, the whole town returned. Their story became legend in Quartz Hill, told and retold to children and grandchildren. The tale of how Kathleen Cooper arrived as a jilted mail-order bride and stayed to become the heart of a community. How Ryland Anderson, a cowboy who had wandered far and wide, found his home and his purpose in loving her. How together, they had proven that worth had nothing to do with the size of someone's body or the depth of their pockets, but rather with the size of their heart and the depth of their commitment to building something meaningful. As they aged gracefully together, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Ryland and Kathleen never lost the spark that had drawn them together that first afternoon in the Lucky Dollar. He still looked at her with wonder and desire, seeing not just the gray in her hair and the lines on her face, but the fierce, brave woman who had captured his heart. She still felt a thrill when he walked into a room, still marveled at the life they had built from nothing but love and determination. On a warm spring afternoon in 1915, when Ryland was 60 and Kathleen was 56, they sat on their porch watching their eldest grandson, named Thomas after his great-grandfather, playing in the yard. Rose had married a rancher from the next county, and she and her family visited often, filling the house with the kind of joyful chaos that Ryland and Kathleen remembered from their own children's youth. "I have been thinking," Kathleen said, her hand resting in Ryland's as it had for countless hours over the past 32 years. "About that day Samuel Garrett came back. Do you remember?" "Of course," Ryland said. "I wanted to throw him through a wall." She laughed, that same warm, genuine sound that had captivated him from the beginning. "I have thought about that day many times over the years. At the time, I was just angry and relieved to be rid of him. But now I see it differently. If he had not abandoned me in the first place, I would have married him. I would have been trapped in a loveless marriage with a weak, selfish man. I would never have started baking at the Lucky Dollar. I would never have met you. Our children, our grandchildren, this entire life we built together, none of it would exist." "So you are saying we should be grateful to Samuel Garrett?" Ryland asked with a raised eyebrow. "I am saying that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things," Kathleen said. "I am saying that I would go through all that pain and uncertainty again if I knew it would lead me here, to you, to this life." Ryland lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Kathleen Anderson. I have loved you from the moment I smelled your cinnamon rolls drifting through the streets of a dying town. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," she said, her eyes shining with the same emotion he felt. "My cowboy, my partner, my home." They sat together as the afternoon faded to evening, watching their grandson play and listening to the sounds of their family inside the house. The ranch spread around them, prosperous and well-maintained, a testament to decades of hard work. In the distance, Quartz Hill bustled with activity, a thriving community that had defied the odds and built something lasting. It was an ordinary moment, and yet it contained everything that mattered: love and family and the satisfaction of a life well lived. Kathleen had come to California seeking security and companionship, but she had found so much more. She had found herself, her purpose, and a love that transformed not just her own life but an entire town. And Ryland, who had returned home expecting to find only struggle and decline, had instead found hope and renewal, and a woman who embodied everything he valued: strength, kindness, courage, and grace. Together, they had proven that it was possible to build something beautiful from ruins, to create community where there had been isolation, and to find extraordinary love in the most ordinary circumstances. As the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ryland and Kathleen remained on their porch, hands clasped, hearts full, surrounded by the evidence of a life richly lived and deeply loved. The scent of baking bread drifted from the kitchen where Rose was teaching her own daughter Kathleen's recipes, ensuring that the legacy would continue for another generation. And in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The plus-size bride who had baked for a failing saloon and the cowboy who had watched the whole town return had found their happily ever after, not in some distant, fantastical place, but right there in Quartz Hill, California, in the ordinary miracle of choosing each other every single day for more than 3 decades. Their love story would be told for generations, inspiring others to believe that rejection could lead to redemption, that courage could transform communities, and that true love, when nurtured and protected, could weather any storm and create a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. It was a testament to the power of showing up, of refusing to give up, and of believing that even in the most unlikely circumstances, hope and love could flourish. And that was exactly how it should be.